Thank you everyone who's here today for joining us for the fourth and final installment in our series, Blackness, Jewishness, and America. For those of you who've been here for the prior 3 sessions, you know that we've covered a lot and we've learned a lot with each other. We began this series with a conversation between Justus and myself about where we have been on our own Black and Jewish journeys and what this has meant for the moment that we're in. We know that America at this point is at a flashpoint and a crossroads, and with race really in the middle of all of that. And so this conversation could not be more timely, and I could not be more excited to bring 2 friends and leaders and brilliant members of the Black and Jewish communities here today to have this conversation with y'all, rabbis and Jewish communal leaders from across the country. I'm joined today by 2 folks who I'm really just excited to have this conversation with. Shahanna McKinney-Baldon is director at the Edot HaMidwest Jewish Diversity Collaborative and a longtime educator in Jewish and public school settings. An active Jewish diversity advocate and thought leader for over 20 years, Shahanna brings past experience serving in a range of organizational leadership roles that have focused on diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice in schools and communities. She comes from a large Midwest U.S. African-American and Ashkenazi family with Seminole, Cherokee, Blackfoot, and Sephardi heritage. Shahanna, thank you for joining us. Rabbi Shais Rishon, also known as MaNishtana, is also here with us today. He is a writer, a playwright, a speaker, novelist, and a rabbi whose work takes prejudice, bias, and ignorance head-on with a humorous and often irreverent voice that shatters the misconceptions of Orthodox Judaism, American Jewish racial identity, and African American religious identity, with gut-punching insights and gut-busting sarcasm, and just a touch of bourbon, and then another touch after that. People who know me know that I enjoy bourbon as well, so it fits that I'm bringing MaNishtana here in this conversation. Justus, before we kick things off, do you have anything you want to add before we get right into it with our panelists?
No, I think you should start, Ginna. Maybe the only thing I would say, because this is a Zoom meeting instead of a Zoom webinar, which our first 3 were. If any, we certainly would love to see each other as much as possible, but especially during some of the small group work that we'll do later on. But if you want to make sure you're seeing and hearing our speakers on the front end of this conversation, you can use the speaker view, which is one of the options at the top right of your Zoom screen, and that will bring folks on to see. And Ginna, I'll let you start the conversation with Shais and Shahanna.
Great. So I'm gonna ask Shais and Shahanna a couple of questions, but then really, because some of the feedback that we got, actually quite a bit of the feedback that we've gotten over the course of this series, is that folks wanted more time to ask questions of our experts and of our panelists and really be in conversation. And since we have a smaller group, a more manageable composition of folks, we're gonna do that today. So we're gonna have a little bit of intro conversation between the 4 of us, and then we're gonna break out into small groups, and you'll get to have some special time with Shahanna or some special time with Shais, and then we'll reconvene as our larger group and identify some key themes, some key challenges, some key next steps that we feel like we want to explore and that we're going to explore as rabbis and communal leaders. And then you'll be free to go, and our 4-part series will be concluded. So again, we're going to start off with a couple questions, have some small group time with Shais and Shahanna, and then reconvene. So I've got a couple questions for y'all. And either of you, I think, can answer all of these, but Shais, I think I'm going to give you right of first refusal on the first one, if I may. All right. Knowing that some Black folks are Jews and some Jews are Black folks, and quite frankly, both communities have work to do to grasp both of those realities, as people like us have our feet planted in those 2 circles and the middle of them. What are some of the things that you feel like we must do to make this happen in those circles, in the Black circle, the Jewish circle, and the intersection, to actually make that reality known, that there are those of us who live in both places and in between?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for the question. For people like us who sort of live in that overlapping Venn diagram of Black and Jewish. The current climate is fraught with terribleness. We have racism coming from Jewish communities. We have a spate of anti-Semitic tropes being espoused by Black communities. And I think what we really need to do in this moment is sort of address the both. And when I say that, I mean that very often we sort of choose the lesser of, two evils. Like, we'll criticize one of the communities that we belong to, but we feel sort of relatively safer in the other one. So we're maybe more forgiving or more, okay, I'll overlook that because when the chips are down in this particular context or this space, I know this community will have my back. And I don't think we can afford to sort of sit in that anymore. And we need to equally, with equal energy, address the ills of both the two communities that we exist in. Otherwise, we're not going to have anywhere that we're safe. We don't have anywhere that essentially we're safe, and we need to make steps to start fixing that. Really,
Shahanna, I want you to answer that as well, but then I'm going to follow up, Shais, with you really quickly and say, is the work different for Blacks or for Jews? Like, are the things you want to do and say and push people and the ways you want to push them, are they different for the Jewish community than for the Black community? Or is it basically, the same order of operations, the same steps, but just in different contexts?
I wouldn't say it's the same steps. Just by dint of, for better or for worse, there has sort of been outreach, or at least a superficial emphasis on Jewish diversity and different voices and different expressions. And there hasn't been as detailed or intentional of a conversation in African American communities about different expressions of authentic Black religious identity, of authentic cultural identity. And so there's a lot more digging that has to be done there to sort of pull up those roots.
Shahanna, how does that sit with you? I mean, I feel it sits quite right with me, and I'm curious what your perspective is on that.
Well, I'm not sure I'm going to answer your question, but I am going to tell you, or you can ask me to repeat the question. Tell me what question you want me to answer.
I'm trying. Well, no. I mean, I want you to say what you can answer my question or not. The original question was: we know that Blacks, Jews, and Black Jews sort of operate and live in this perpetual Venn diagram of our communities, right? We've got feet both firmly planted in the Jewish community and the Black community, and then in that middle space too. What are the types of things that need to happen in both of those circles, and maybe even in the middle, to make sure that both of those communities recognize their own diversity within, and they do the things that both reflect it and serve that diversity?
Okay. I'll do the Jewish thing and answer your question with some other questions and some reflections. First, I'll tell you what I was thinking about as I was listening to Shais speak. So, as you all heard in the lovely intro, thank you, Ginna, I do work around Jewish diversity and racial justice in the Midwest US region. And my attention is hyper-focused on local community life. So there's this narrative, there's a national narrative, there's an international narrative, and then there's this really different frame. Am I breaking up? Can you all hear me okay?
You're not breaking up, but there is a little bit of static.
Okay. I don't know that I can do anything about the static, but I was breaking up on my end. I apologize. I'll do my best here. National narrative, international narrative, and then the hyper local day-to-day experience that people have. And I think, I mean, I don't know, but I have wonderings about how do the national and international narratives get conflated with our local experience depending on where we live? In the Midwest, my experience is one of great distance between those two things, if you will, or among those three things. But I kind of was wondering, Shais, as I was listening to you talk about the New York experience versus my experience here in Wisconsin. So I will say that very generally, I do think that there are some things that both communities need to be doing, and that in between space on the Venn diagram, of course, is where we exist. And that we need to be taking great care to be planful about what we're doing in the different parts of the Venn diagram. What I mean by that is that, first of all, as we're doing anti-racism work, we need to be, when we're doing anti-racism work as Jews, we need to be centering Jewish people of color in that work. We need to be partnering with Jews of color. We need to be investing in the leadership of Jews of color. And we need to be making sure that Jews of color are present in the decision-making around how we're doing our Jewish anti-racism work. And the Black community also should be thinking about Black diversity and how we have some experiences that are the same. And of course, this is something that Black people have known since they brought us over here, that we're an incredibly diverse group of many peoples with many experiences. And of course, back then, many languages, we still have many languages, many identities. Yeah. And I do think that it would behoove us as Black folks to put some new types of attention on the diversity within our communities, because we believe that diversity is a great strength, and that when we have diversity at the table, I mean, this is the business case for all this DEI stuff, right? Diversity increases the bottom line. I'm an educator, so it's very uncomfortable for me to say that. Maybe you all heard me.
Well, we can have multiple benefits, right? It's a bottom line. It was a triple bottom line, right? To borrow another term from the business world. Yep.
Right. I'll also say that I think it's really important that we are doing this work, no matter who we are, in strong coalitions. And that we must be investing in having strong relationships so that our coalitions are strong. We all are familiar with the mythic Black Jewish coalition from back in the day, and we lament how it went away. But one of the things we don't put our attention on as much is that that was a coalition that was largely about the elites of organizations being in relationship with each other. There were people in communities who had relationships too, but it was about leaders of big, high-profile organizations having relationships with each other and having strategy about building the coalition and mirroring out to the world the work of this coalition. And I'll just also say finally that one of the things that we all should be doing is linking this work to our values. We have very strong African American values that we can apply to our anti-racism work and to our coalition building work. And we have very strong Jewish values that we should be applying to this work as well. And one of the things that's exciting for me about intergroup dialogue work is getting into the richness of the values that are driving us in our justice work and sharing, not in a culturally appropriative way, but sharing these values and with each other and using these values to strengthen our work and our coalitions. Ignore my dog. I'm going to leave myself here.
I was going to ask Shahanna a question, but I will wait for the pooch to get over the unexpected visitor. And Shais,
I
were
would,
you about to say
I
something?
would like to piggyback off something that Shahanna
Yes, please. Yes,
uh,
please.
comes to dealing with anti-racism work, anti-Semitism, that the voices of Jews of color need to be centered. I think that's a crucial piece that's missing and also makes our work harder as Black Jews trying to create inroads into African American spaces and sort of celebrating that diversity of authentic Black spiritual expressions. Because I've noticed, and it continuously happens, when someone Black says something anti-Semitic, they're connected with Holocaust survivors. They're connected with, white Ashkenazi figures and rabbis, which only exacerbates sort of the problem. And it sort of, it intimates this sort of concept of, oh no, they need to talk to a real Jew or a really, and that's who they need to talk to. But if we're not in that conversation and we're not the ones talking, we know what the background is. We know civil rights, we know Nation of Islam, we know the fraught and complicated relationship there are with these sort of organizations and entities, as opposed to somebody, oh, I don't really get that cultural,
Right.
let me hear and inform you about Jews. It's like, no, we can do the both. The
Yep.
reason that this keeps happening is we aren't in that conversation to do the both. There's not someone in dialogue when someone Black says something anti-Semitic say, hey, I get why this is a thing that you think. I also see in places where, yes, there is legitimate criticism about anti-Blackness from Jews in Jewish spaces sometimes. However, this is why this particular thing that you said is anti-Semitic and wrong. This is how that breaks down what it actually means and how it actually impacts people that look like you, just don't happen to have that particular cultural, religious expression that you have. So if what constantly gets put forth are the standard of what Jews look like, and the rest of that diversity isn't brought, there's nothing left but for Black communities to think, oh, Jews look like this, and they're part of this, and it feeds right back into like that James Baldwin essay, Black people are anti-Semitic because they're anti-white.
So that was a segue into a different question, which is maybe a little bit more timely than the one I was going to ask, which is, you mentioned Black folks trafficking in the anti-Semitic tropes, which we've seen, unfortunately, a number of in the last 10 days or so. And we have seen an interesting range of responses. And you hit, as you can imagine, to that. And I'm curious, one term that I began to see percolating in around Hanukkah time, December, January, when obviously there were the incidents in Muncie and there were the rising anti-Semitic attacks on visibly Hasidic folks in Brooklyn, and then also the shootings in Jersey City, was this notion of Black anti-Semitism. And I have a strong reaction to that, Shais, and I'm actually curious to that notion. And I'm actually curious if you also had a strong reaction to such terminology, and if you might have some thoughts while we're talking about who has conversations with whom and what is understandable for a people to think if they haven't learned or studied or been with or been exposed to, right? Like, talk to me a little bit about this notion of anti-Semitism and Black anti-Semitism, if it exists.
There is no such thing as Black anti-Semitism any more than there's such a thing as Black on Black crime. There is crime, and then there are people that commit it. There is anti-Semitism, and there are people that inflict it. If we're going to name Black anti-Semitism, then we also need to name white anti-Semitism. And if we're going to delineate between the two, then we also need to address the difference between the two. If we're going to talk about white anti-Semitism, for example, actually the root behind both of the anti-Semitisms are the conception of Jews being white. For white anti-Semitism, Jews are fake white people that can infiltrate real white people and therefore assert dominance and take control and, one world order and all those kind of things. Black anti-Semitism, Jews are still white. So it's just another outgrowth of fighting white supremacy and patriarchal systems, which white Jews or white passing Jews have access to, and do propagate in some instances, and the privilege that comes along with that. So it comes down again to us needing to be in that conversation to break down all of that and to dismantle all of that.
Yep. And Shahanna, you are an educator. You've been in front of classrooms and kids and adults on this very nitty-gritty issue, right? What does it look like to be inclusive? What does it look like to really not just have people at the table and be present, but to actually be in deep conversation? What are the things, like, how do we get some of this, what are the actual ways that we get some of this better learning done and some of this deeper conversation and deeper relationship happening in the midst of everything that we see going on right now?
Yes. Well, I've been an educator in the nitty-gritty, even on this very topic of Black anti-Semitism. I say that as one word, Black anti-Semitism. I would like to recommend a book to you all, actually. It's called Strangers and Neighbors, edited by John Bracey and Maurianne Adams. Years ago, I was a teaching assistant in a course that the two of them taught at UMass Amherst, and that book was the primary text. And I'm pretty sure there's an essay in that book about there's no such thing as Black anti-Semitism. Shais, I think I'll differ with you on or take a little bit of a different tack around some of the ideas that you shared. I agree with what you said about how contemporary American racism interfaces with anti-Semitism and how it's all predicated on this idea of Jews as white people. But of course, anti-Semitism is much older than the idea of white people. And so I invite all of us to work hard, learn a lot, get really smart about and comfortable with talking about the ways that it does make sense for us to overlay our understanding and our framework of contemporary American racism onto our understandings of contemporary anti-Semitism, but also to keep in mind that it's not always necessarily going to be an exact fit. I mean, this, I think, is one of our challenges around reaching to do the work around ending the horrible things that are happening to Palestinians. And then folks want to overlay this contemporary American understanding of racism right on top of the situation in Israel, Palestine. And it's not an exact fit. There might be some things that are the same or similar or that can inform our understanding, but it's not exactly the same. That's all. That's a point I wanted to make. And one of the things that Black anti-Semitism and white anti-Semitism do have in common is the Christian roots of anti-Semitism. And the way that anti-Semitism, was brought over here, I've used that phrase a few times today, was brought here by Europeans, and then how it informed the manifestations of societal oppression that are so foundational to this country's history and that we experience today. As far as doing deep learning, we must not do it in isolation. We must we should diversify our portfolios, and try to come at this work from a few different angles. There are wonderful bodies of practice around deep learning on social justice issues. And there are also some really varied bodies of practice. And I invite all of us to come at the work from different angles, and to never think that we've gotten there, but to always see the work as a journey that we are doing in community, not in isolation. Find yourself a wonderful chavruta, or bring your current chavruta along with you for the ride, and get engaged in some sustained learning over time. And that goes for all of us, no matter what our background in this work, no matter our identities. The isolation tries to creep in and distract us from staying the course. And for those, I'll speak for myself. As a Black Jewish person from Wisconsin, I want to give a little shout out to Rabbi Mark Berkson of Milwaukee, who's here with us today. I'm a graduate of Hillel Academy in Milwaukee. My brothers and I were never the only Black kids in the school. There were always other African American kids and other kids of color around. But I did get this message that I was different, that I was the only one, and I internalized some of that about I'm the only one. And because I'm older than you, Ginna, I can remember a time when we were doing this Jewish diversity work and Jews of color connecting work without social media, and it was really different. Now we have many more opportunities to, my kids have all these Jews of color who are, like famous singers, Drake and Doja Cat, and it's really different. But that's all to say that pull around the isolation for me has that particular flavor of being a recording of this idea around being the only one. And I would also like to challenge all of us as Jews of color who are leading to really step into being in relationship with each other stronger and harder and more sustainably. And these are very easy words to say, but of course the work is challenging. And lo aleinu hamlacha ligmor, but we can't just sit around and wait for something to happen. We must all be leading in this area that goes for every single one of us.
Thank you, Shahanna. Really appreciate that call to action for all of us here. It's now 2:31. We're gonna give everyone a chance to have a little bit more intimate time with our brilliant panelists. So, Hartman team, Justus and Justin and Michael, some combination of y'all are going to randomly assign us all to some groups. I've got one, Shahanna's got one, and Shais will have one, and Justus and Justin will be hanging out in one of those two. I'll be alone, so everybody who's in my group, don't gang up on me. Justin, take it away.
Can I say something? His Hebrew Israelites, Shais and Ginna. Oh, look at Rabbi Rishon's giggle. So it's very important to have a really deep, nuanced understanding of these communities, the histories of these communities, the great diversity among these communities, and to not conflate the Hebrew Israelite communities with the term Black Jews broadly, even though for many of us the term Black Jews has just meant the Hebrew Israelite communities. And for those of us who are from places that don't have Hebrew Israelite communities, Danny, that question is like, oh, what is he talking about? I would love to be in touch with whoever would like to talk more about the Hebrew Israelite communities and where they fit in with what we're talking about here today. But one point I do want to make is the Hebrew Israelite communities. I have a theory. When I build my time machine, I'll be able to really check this out. But I believe that the Hebrew Israelite communities have always been safe havens for Jews, mainstream Jews, halachic Jews who also happen to be Black. I have seen that time and time again, visiting these communities in many different places. And I've also read about some historic accounts of folks who were in these communities, but their identity was one of Judaism from somewhere else, not New York in the 1920s, maybe India, There's a story about an Indian Jewish man who was a member of one of the early black synagogues in New York. A long speech for what was not such a long question, Danny, but I would love to be in touch with whoever would love to discuss, and I'm going to put my email in the chat. And hosts, can you put my and Shais's emails addresses in the chats a few more times for folks so that they'll be able to be in touch?
Yes, there we go. And then Shais, do you want me to put your Gmail in there? Is that sufficient, or do you not want your email in the chat?
My MaNishtana one put in.
The MaNishtana. So one thing I wanted to do, we had some small group conversation. Shahanna, you busted into the full group with dropping some real knowledge. And actually, Richard in our group was bringing up a similar scenario of Black congregations and Black Jewish congregations or Black non-Jewish congregations. That we were having that same conversation as well in our group. So I appreciate you coming into that space with that. I wanted to use this time for us all to surface some of the key themes and challenges and or ideas that may have come up in our small group time. I know that in our group, folks talked quite a bit about just the move from conversation and learning to action. What does that look like? How do we do that? How do we make the conversation space productive, and so that people aren't feeling fragile or as if other people are fragile? What does that look like? A couple folks, one person brought up, how do we have conversations about anti-Black racism at the same time as we might have conversations on being pro-Israel? Like on a college campus, a Hillel organization is going to have decidedly pro-Israel viewpoints and programming, and that might be a challenge on campus to hold both of those. And what does building those relationships look like? I think another piece is that was lifted up is for white Jews who are in communities where there aren't that many people of color, let alone Jews of color. What does it mean for them to have these conversations in spaces like that? Do they need to import folks? I said yes. I said import some folks. Bring in some people. Don't just have this conversation, like you said, Shahanna, in isolation. That's not the way that we're actually going to achieve liberation for Black folks and for all of us. So I would love for Justus, Justin, Shais, Shahanna, lifting up some of the other themes that came up in y'all's small group conversations.
Can I say something about college campuses?
Yes.
I work at a university, and I have a theory.
Not just any university.
The University of Wisconsin-Madison. We just call it the university here. Madison. I don't mean for this to sound, I don't know, Pollyanna-ish, but I'll just say again, like a broken record, relationships, that we need to be building proactive relationships so that then when something comes up, the relationships are already in place. And those of us who work on college campuses need to be the standard bearers for building and maintaining those relationships so that the students can leverage our relationships as they are doing their work as student leaders. I don't work directly with students, so I'm open to criticism on this, but I really believe that there's something missing on a lot of college campuses in terms of the grown-ups. The students are grown-ups on a college campus too, but the people who work for the university and for the university adjacent institutions being really proactive about having those cross-community relationships. And I think it can also be complicated because religion, sometimes in some places they're like, oh, well, we don't do that. Religion is not, that's off campus, call the Hillel over there. Mm-hmm. But I do think that it's very important that those of us who have, that this is, if this is at all in our sphere of influence, we need to be working so that Jews are included in the narrative about who we are as a multicultural community on a college campus. And that goes for the wider community as well.
Thank you, Shahanna. Shais, Justus, Justin, any other key themes or points that came up in the small groups that would be great to share in the larger space?
Oh, I'm unmuted. We were talking about sort of navigating that balance between centering Jew of color voices while contrasting that it's not up to Jews of color to figure things out, and what that means and how to balance that. A great example that was brought up, who brought it up? Where is he? I can't find him. There you are, Jeffrey. Jeffrey brought it up. We were discussing sort of the difference, which it sort of spiraled into why I created TribeHerald with Yitz Jordan, was to have a space for Jews of color to actually express thoughts, because Jews of color are generally often tapped on by mainstream Jewish media in one of two scenarios. Either scenario A, oh, somebody black said something anti-Semitic, what do you think? Or scenario B, somebody white said something racist, what do you think? And the point is, we think thoughts all the time. We have the same thoughts about the same things that, you know, the rest of mainstream Jewish Americans do, about religion, observance, politics, Israel, and all those other kind of things. But yet, it's also contrasted with whenever somebody black says something anti-Semitic, they're connected with, you know, real, authentic Jews, where it's a sort of having your cake and eating it too, where, this black person said something and I want to say something, that might seem weird. Let me find a black person to say it. But meanwhile, they're still not Jewish enough to actually deal with the problem over here. So there is just a convenient window dressing, or some version of a sock puppet, really. And that's really what that balancing is, where it's not up to us to do the work, but also center our voice. It's not up to us to decipher, you know, this scenario for you, but also center our voice, because we know the voice that needs to be heard and used in this conversation.
Yeah, 100%.
Ginna, can I ask one quick question of our
Yes.
leading voices as we kind of close out? I've been hearing this from rabbis in another session that I was at, and also conversations in our small group. It was asked. So the high holidays are coming up. This is a group of clergy, educators, and professionals. A lot of people who are going to be doing programming, planning programming for the fall, who are motivated to do programming related to racial justice. Have you seen things in your communities that you would put on the top of your list that you would want to recommend in terms of using liturgy, in terms of using educational opportunities? Given that there is a receptiveness in this moment that does feel strong and new, and a door we want to walk through as much as possible, any priorities you want to highlight for this group of educators, professionals, and clergy?
I will talk briefly. Is this okay, Shais? Were you going to say something? I'm having a little lag here.
Go ahead, you're good.
I want to talk about something that was really profound for me. At our synagogue retreat in January, way before COVID, another lifetime, my rabbi did like a write a page of Talmud exercise where there were blank sheets that had like a little text in the middle, and then you sat in a circle and everybody wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote, and we discussed. And it was about Trump's Jews as a nationality thing. Do you remember that? Ancient history.
Yep.
That And a bunch of the texts, like base texts that she used, were tweets from Black Jewish influencers on Twitter. We had the hipster Rebbe in there, and we had Yum coconut milk in there, and we had, I forget what Rebecca Pierce's is. And that was so meaningful to me. It was so meaningful. So I guess one of the things I want to say, Justus, is we need our rabbis and our leaders and others with positional authority to step in and do. And we're going to make mistakes. And we're going to be clunking along. We can clean them up. I will also say that my organization, Edot, has been getting a lot of requests for resources. And these are resources that maybe one day we will create, but we don't have them ready to go. And it's very hard for us to field these requests and take on big new projects without increasing our revenue. So one thing my group heard loud and clear is centering Jews of color and supporting our leadership means investing in us and not inviting us to volunteer all the time, but paying people to do stuff. And so if you're interested in developing some resources, email me. Edot would love to talk to you about the possibilities. There are some pieces that have been created. I see coming up in the chat a few Unitana Tokefs. My rabbi read there's a Kaddish for Black Lives. My rabbi read I can't remember if it was some kind of a sluchas thing or some other prayer that had been written somewhere else that she found and then read during the service. Maybe a project that some of us could take on would be to collect some of these resources in one place for folks to find.
Thank you, Shahanna. Shais, it's 3:15. I think those were great words. Shais, I'm going to let you take us out, and then Justus, you can wrap up on behalf of Hartman if you would like, but I'm going to let Shais have actually, I think, the final word here, if I may take co-host.
I was good with Shahanna. Like, she dropped the mic there.
Well, she did, but I didn't want to just not let you out. So if you want to say we're good, we can say we're good, and I can say thank you to Shais and Shahanna for coming today. But if you want to say something, Shais, I'm giving you that opportunity now.
Why, thank you. So I guess sort of the last point to sort of keep in the back of our heads, particularly if we're leaders who have congregations or building spaces, particularly around high holidays, the usual trope of the increased security that happens around high holidays, point of stress usually every year for Jews of color. It doesn't necessarily translate to safety for people who get stopped at the door during the regular year.
Yeah.
So to sort of keep that piece in the back of our minds.
Yeah. Thank you. So grateful, Shais and Shahanna, for y'all joining us today. Thank you so much. Thank you to our attendees who made this fourth session a great one. Justus, thank you. And thank you to Hartman for being amenable to creating this space. I hope this is the beginning of much more to come. I think what is clear and what we have learned over today and the last, in the prior 3 days as well, covering this topic, is that there is work to do. We cannot do it alone. We must do it together. And this is an imperfect journey. And it is one for the lifetime, right? We won't ever get perfect at this so that we don't have to work at racial equity within our Jewish community. We just have to get better and better at it. So thank you all for joining us for this series. Thank you, Hartman, for hosting, and onward.